All right, everyone, welcome to the show. Tennessee WildCast here, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency's weekly podcast show. I'm Doug Markham. This is Jason Harmon. We'll introduce our guest just here in a minute. Jason, I heard you went to a waterfowl blind drawing the other day, and I also heard through the rumor, through the grapevine, that you got a blind, sort of.
Sort of, yeah. I just got lucky and went to the Wilson County draw there at the
Old
fairgrounds.
Hickory, for Old Hickory Wildlife Management.
Old Hickory, Wildlife Management Area, Unit 1 and 2. And my buddy got drawn for Unit 1, so there's a possibility I'll go duck hunting this year.
Well, I'll be darned. You know how hard that is? How many people were there that day?
It's tough. There was probably a couple thousand there, it seemed like. There was a lot of people there.
Your buddy got drawn?
Yeah.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Pretty early, too, which was surprising.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Hey, if you went to a waterfowl blind drawing and you got drawn and you signed on, just remember you got to get those blinds. You got to get those things all fixed up and ready to go. I think the deadline's sometime in October.
Yeah.
You have to have them ready and looking good and get it out there, because if you got a blind, you're lucky, Jason.
Yeah.
I hope your buddy takes you hunting.
Hey, I think I got it in.
Yeah. All right. Hey, we have a show today I've been looking forward to. And let's do a little wide out here and show our guests. This is Dan Gibbs. Dan is the statewide bear coordinator for TWA. Sounds like a great job, and a big game biologist over at Region 4, way over in East Tennessee. Dan, thanks for coming in here today.
You bet.
You got a big meeting coming up, and we got Dan in here before the meeting because we think it's important to talk about the subject of bears. And I'm not sure if everybody in Tennessee even knows we have bears.
Well, you're right. They don't.
Yeah. So, and you probably know better than anybody that we got bears. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to tell everyone up front, Jason's also going to do a WildCast Extra with Dan that you'll catch out on Facebook, too. And I hope you look over. Some of those extras are cool. All of them are, Jason. You're doing them, right? Especially cool. Anyway, Dan, let's talk about bears today. First of all, what does your job as a big game biologist, but a bear biologist in this case, what does it entail? What does it mean?
Well, we get that question a lot, no matter what you do. And when you start talking about your day-to-day activities, many times it's difficult because you don't know one day from the next what you're going to be doing. For me, a lot of it is administrative type things and working in management planning, working with other states. I work quite a bit with other state biologists in the Southeast. I've got a couple projects going on currently that I'm really active in with North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, especially. Also Florida.
Right. Pull that thing a little bit tighter to you, Dan.
All right.
So the biologists that you work with all over the Southeast then, but are they ones that usually just butt against Tennessee, or what were you talking about, a few that are outside beyond where we are?
Well, if we're doing some research projects together, then obviously it's going to be the states that join Tennessee, but the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies has a very active group we call the Large Carnivore Working Group that we have multiple issues that we're dealing with on a regional basis, and all the coordinators from the states work together on that. So
you have one of those jobs where people listen and think that must be the coolest job in the world. Is it the coolest job in the world?
Some days it is, and some days it's not.
Sounds pretty neat, though. All right, so you work with other folks, and just in general, not just in Tennessee, we'll get down to scoping just Tennessee, but over at least the southern part of the country, the southeastern part, are there a lot of bears? Are they as populous as white-tailed deer?
No, not even close. But if you look at historical range maps, the bulk of the United States, continental U.S., and even up into Alaska and Canada, there was a large black bear population, and those numbers dwindled drastically, and it got to the point in Tennessee where we didn't even have hunting seasons in the early 70s. And so if you look at a current range map compared to the historical range map, there's nowhere near what it used to be. But if you look at a current map compared to 20 years ago, there's quite a difference. The bears are doing quite well. They're growing all across the Southeast, and even some of your states that you get up into the Midwest, such as Indiana and Ohio, are starting to see bears come into those states. They've not had any, reproducing populations for years and years and years, and they're starting to spill over into those states as well.
They aren't as populous as deer or turkey, but is it fair to say good management is the reason they're coming back? Were they over harvested at one time, or just taken out because people feared them, or what was the reason bears dwindled in number, and how come they have come back?
I think the bulk of it was over harvest, and then just major deforestation when the early settlement came along. But there was this idea that bears and other predators, and such as wolves and cougars and things like that, you couldn't coexist with human settlement and advancement into the interior part of the country. So, they had that going against them. And then bears, in particular, they're not as prolific as other animals. They're going to be 3 to 5 years old before a female can have young, and then they're going to have young every other year. So it takes longer to account for
like
that
a
kind
deer,
of stuff.
where a deer might have 1 to 3 or whatever every single
year.
Okay,
Correct.
so it just takes a while to get it done.
Right.
Well, tell us about, before we get into specifics about the bear program, hunting seasons, if you want to view a bear and all that kind of stuff. Tell us about the bear in general, the characteristics of a black bear. How big is it, and some of the birth stuff you were talking about, and how predatory is it?
Well, black bears range in size depending on where you're at. Time of year, a bear will be 30% heavier in the fall before it goes into the den than when it comes out.
It's a hibernator.
Well, it's not a true hibernator, but it is a hibernator.
Okay.
They can get up in the wintertime and move around. If you get some warm days, they might get up, feed a little bit, move around. So your weights are going to vary. If you look at different studies that have done a lot of work on weight, usually your males are going to be 75 to 100 pounds heavier than your females in a given area. I'd say in Tennessee, you're probably looking at around, on average, 150 on a female and maybe 225 or something on a male. We've had harvests as high as 600 pounds, things like that. But when you get into a bear that big, typically you're going to be dealing with a supplemental feeding issue or garbage or something like that, which is a whole different story.
They start eating too much like people at that
Correct.
point, right? Okay, but that's what I've always heard. I was surprised when I started working here, and I went on and followed some of the folks like you around over in the Smokies and watched them get bears out, and I was so surprised at how skinny some of them were and how small some of them were. I don't even mean to make them sound like they're dog size, but they're not at the same time the size of a grizzly or a polar bear. I mean, they're the little bears in the family.
Right. They're going to be smaller overall, and they're not nearly as aggressive as you would with a brown bear or a polar bear. Predatory attacks are very rare in black bears. We hear about more because we have more bears, but as far as when you look at percentage of the population that does that, is very low. Most issues with bears attack-wise are associated with people getting too close, and the bear's just basically reacting.
Cub issue, right? A lot of times.
I mean, it can be a cub issue. Seems like a lot of times we don't really know the connection, but a lot of times when you hear about some sort of attack, you're just waiting for where the dog comes into the equation, where the person was walking their dog or something like that, and don't really have any scientific background, but it just seems like a dog can be involved quite a bit when you hear about some of these situations that come up. So I don't know if it's the dogs are barking at the bear and are annoyed by it or things like that, but that seems to come up quite a bit. But it's usually a reaction more than a predatory thing if you have an issue. Okay,
what do bears like to eat? Are they full-time predators looking for small bucks and rabbits, and where do they mainly get?
Well, like I said, predation is very rare, even with other wildlife. Deer fawns, you occasionally hear where someone has seen that happen. Get a report of that out of the Smoky Mountains every once in a while. And then occasionally they'll get into chicken houses. You hear sometimes, we don't have that much of an issue here, but some of the other states tend to have issues with goats, things like that. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, their protein diet, as far as meat or what if you will, would be grubs, ants, bees, things like that. And then they eat a lot of vegetation in the spring. When they come out of the den, there's not a whole lot to eat, so it's pretty much what green vegetation is coming up. And then they'll switch over to berries in the early summer and more vegetation, and once again the yellow jackets and things like that, and then switch over to the hard mast in the fall.
Seems like it's Dr. Pellerin is that correct? Pelton, excuse me, Dr. Pelton, because he's so smart. And I got to talk to him 20 years ago or so and learned a lot from talking to him about bears at the time. And if I recall, I believe he said that he thought bears, as cool as they are, and he knew so much about them, he said that as far as predators goes, they were fairly klutzy as predators.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, but that their diet was a lot when they came out of their dens. They're looking for roots to start out,
right,
and going from there.
Yeah, and a bear they have a real good keen eyesight and hearing, but their best trait, I guess, and probably the one that causes us the most trouble, is their sense of smell. Their sense of smell is reported to be 6-7 times that of a dog.
I know
so,
that. Wow.
And so you can imagine
of a dog.
So you can imagine things that we just can't imagine what that's like. But that gets them into so much trouble.
Yeah.
Especially when food is short.
What do you spend time? And I want to talk about how they're expanding, and because occasionally we're doing this show out of Nashville, and occasionally we hear about a bear coming through Nashville. Every so often we hear something like that. But what over in East Tennessee, it's far more common with the Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains, and just a lot of great places for them to go over there, good habitat for them. What are people more aware that they're there, and what kind of education do you do to the folks in East Tennessee that us Middle Tennesseans and West Tennesseans might want to hear?
Well, I think the thing that's really keyed people in more on bears are this huge interest we've had over the last 8 to 10 years, I guess now, in trail cameras that people are putting out to monitor deer or turkeys, and they're calling in saying, "You're never going to believe what I saw on my trail camera," and I say, "A bear." And and
talking to the wrong person with that.
So they're popping up on these trail cameras, and people had no idea that they were there. And they're not only are they seeing a bear, but they're seeing a sow with cubs and things like that. And that's really interesting to us when we see, especially in areas where we don't have what we would call a sustainable population yet, reports of females of cubs. That's a big deal, and because you're showing reproduction, those bears aren't hauling those cubs all the way from Smoky Mountains up to Anderson or Campbell County. She had them there, and so that tells us that, hey, she's living here, she's got her home range, there's obviously males in the area, and they're setting up shop here, and you can expect them to be there in the long term. So but the main thing that people have to understand is you have to be proactive with bears. You cannot wait till you're having problems to start dealing with it. If you live in an area where there are bears, or if you hear there's bears, you got to get the food source up. Food is what drives probably 98% of our issues with bears when it comes
leaving your
when
cat
it comes
food,
to
dog
nuisance.
food, and trash, all that stuff outside.
Even grills, feeding birds, all that. Now,
I bet they like suet. Anyway,
they do.
Go ahead.
I mean, the amount of calories and things like that.
Yeah.
And we've put some things together for educational that show, what one of those suet cake that you put in a bird feeder it equates to when it comes to foraging for acorns in the forest. And the amount of time to get up there and knock that thing down and eat it is what it would take them almost all day long to get the same amount of calories. So
easy pickings,
right. and they're going to come back, and and bears are typically afraid of people, but that nose and that stomach, over time they get used to seeing. They'll come in at the night and knock it down, and then they'll get a little bit more bolder, and they'll come in the daytime, and the next thing you know, they're willing to reach into a vehicle or go into a closed door. And when you get into that, you've got real issues.
So they smell that suet. I had no idea their smelling was that good. They smell that suet, and they're going to get there before Brother Jack gets there. Right? They're going to get there before the other bear gets there. So.
And dog food. I mean, they smell that, high protein. But, we did a survey about 3 years ago for Tennessee residents' opinions, and it was a statewide survey. And there's high support for bears in the state and bear management.
Glad to hear that.
Right. Yeah. And you do look at other states that have done the same type surveys, and it's the same results. The thing that you have to look at, though, is the closer the bear gets to the home, the tolerance decreases, which makes sense. They want them here. They like the idea they're here, but they don't want to open up their door and see a bear stand in their backyard. Well, the reason they're in the yards is because they're being attracted by food. So that's something that can be addressed.
Well, we handle that here in Middle Tennessee too, not with bears, but I mean it's the same with raccoons, and possums, and everything else that eats meat, I guess. But we're always constantly telling them that. Now, no different there, except that it's a slightly bigger critter and one that you don't really want hanging out in your backyard. And the agency doesn't want it hanging out in your backyard. That just creates problems for TWRA. It
creates problems for our officers that are ones that typically have to respond to those issues. It causes problems for people in the neighborhood, and it causes problems for the bear. I mean, at some point, you have to make a decision. Is the issue with this bear, is it becoming a public safety issue? And that can happen. And once again, as I said earlier, it's not because it's a predatory issue. It's just because the bear is so used to people. People are getting closer and closer to take pictures. They're hand feeding them, things like that. And eventually it just comes to a head, and the animal is going to have to be euthanized. And nobody wants to do that.
Don't want to do it. Want to stay away from that. That said, though, Dan, they're coming more, right? How many bears are there in Tennessee? Does the agency have an idea? And are these bears expanding? Or is there a good chance we're going to see more of them here, at least on the plateau part of Tennessee, if not in Middle and West Tennessee?
Well, yes, they're expanding, and yes, you're going to see more. And they're going to come from East Tennessee, and they're also going to come from Kentucky, and they're going to come from Mississippi, and they're going to come from Alabama, and they could even potentially come from Arkansas.
Wow.
Bears are very good swimmers. Swimming the Mississippi River is no big deal for a bear. And we're hearing, more. Mississippi has bears collared, and I have family that's in the northeastmost county of Mississippi, and they've heard reports of bears over in Corinth, which is just south of Pickwick. So it's coming, and people need to be prepared and know what to do to reduce the chance of having issues.
Nothing will get the press to call you quicker than a black bear or a cougar.
Right.
If it comes through this area, we give a telephone call.
Right. And, I told one of the ladies from Knoxville one day, we were just talking about it, and she said, what were your goals? And I was kind of joking around with her. And I said, well, one goal was that bears in Knox County not be newsworthy anymore. And honestly, we'd like to get to that. I mean, we'd like for people to understand, hey, we live in Knox County. We have great bear habitat north of us. We have great bear habitat south of us. And you're going to see bears in Knox County. And we'd rather it be, hey, it's springtime, the bears are coming out, moving around, make sure you take care of the things you need to take care of versus, a big news item.
Do we know how, and it may not be a fair question, Dan, do we know how many we have? I know with deer and turkey, we do an estimate based on harvest reports and a bunch of other stuff. Do we know with bears for sure what we have?
Well, when you're dealing with big game, it's very difficult to get population numbers because most of the time you're basing on what you've harvested.
Right.
And when you go back and reconstruct the populations, you see trends that go up and down with your harvest. So it just gives you an idea. And based on those types of numbers, we're somewhere between 5,000, 5,500, including what's in the park. But the nice thing is...
And when you say park, you mean the Smoky Mountains?
The Smoky Mountains. Okay. And then you've got another 400 or 500 probably total on the entire plateau. The thing that's nice, and that would probably be a high number there, we did a survey about 3 years ago using DNA and came up with estimate about 220 in the core population around Big South Fork. But what's nice about that is we're getting ready to embark on a project pending approval and funding with North Carolina, Georgia, and South Carolina to survey the entire southern Appalachian
mountains. That's great.
And that's going to be our first real true bear population survey we've had.
Do you feel like you're on an island, Dan, or do all the biologists you work with in all these other states, they going through the same thing that you are? Oh, yeah. And in some cases, even more of an issue. You get down into Florida, it's amazing the number of bears they have around Orlando and their urban areas. And those guys are really, there's guys down there, that's all they do all day long, every day, is deal with nuisance bears. They've had to put a lot of bears down because of things we've talked about of bears in neighborhoods getting too used to people. And a lot of things going on in other states. Asheville or North Carolina has got a multi-year project that they're just focusing on urban bears in Asheville. And it's just amazing the number of bears that are in the city limits of Asheville. Whereas if we had a place where nuisance bears, I almost don't like that word, but I guess that's what they become at some point, and a lot because of human issues. But where would be that place in Tennessee? Is it Gatlinburg? Is it Pigeon Forge? Where is it?
Our ground zero in nuisance really is going to be Sevier County. And also you can get into Cosby and even into Townsend over in Blount County and Cott County. Around the Smoky Mountains is where we have our primary. Well, we have issues everywhere, but when you look at the end of the year, the number of calls that came in, those counties are going to be the ones that get the most attention.
Okay, a couple things I do want to talk about hunting season some and your zones and all that stuff. But before we get there, a couple of things or one of the things I remember talking with Dr. Pellerin about years ago, that the Smoky Mountains was like a great big refuge for bears when their numbers weren't so high. That a lot of the animals, if I recall, that spread out into areas where they were more huntable came off of the Smoky because they were expanding the range from the Smokies. Is that true today? Is the Smoky Mountains still a good place for them to sort of have a large refuge, or are things different management wise?
Well, they don't allow hunting in the Smoky Mountains
Right.
National Park. It's within, that's all under the jurisdiction of the federal government, and so hunting is not allowed. Excuse me. So, to answer your question is yes. It acts as a core, and the spillover comes out into Sevier County, and North Carolina doesn't have the, with the exception of Cherokee, they don't have the amount of urbanization around the park that we do. So they don't have as many issues. But yeah, that's it's been part of the management plan of the agency from the 70s, where these bear refuges where hunting is not allowed, and your population spill out of those refuges. And the Smoky Mountains has always been part of that whole system.
Okay. All right. And still important to this day to whatever.
Yes.
And that's the place, if you want to go view bears, good place to go to have a good chance of seeing them.
Right. And, they a lot of people go up there with the very reason to see bears, and there's nothing wrong with seeing a bear, but we encourage people to view them from a distance. In the Smokies, they actually have regulation. You cannot be within 50 yards. If you get closer than 50 yards, then you're in violation
That's
of that law.
too close for me. That's
Right.
close to a bear. They can cover 50 yards. They get mad at you. But anyway,
Yes.
Dan, people would be surprised to know, you mentioned it at the very outstart of this, that bears were all over Tennessee at one time. What habitat do they prefer, and why are they tend to be pushed up into the mountains
Right.
at this time in life?
Well, best case scenario, they're going to be, the high elevations are good for Tennessee, because people typically aren't going to get in there and develop the higher elevations. They're too steep, things like that. You can't get the resource in. So that's kind of why they hung on there.
Gravitated to there.
But, you get down coastal states, there's plenty of bears in the coast around areas where there's plenty of development. So the idea that bears need mountains is not the case.
Okay.
They can adapt to pretty much anything. And, back in the 1830s, Davy Crockett reported that he killed 108 bears in a single year in Lake County.
That's where Reelfoot Lake is, isn't it?
It's Reelfoot Lake. And, if you read some historical accounts of what that area looked like, and that would have been 20 years after the earthquake, 25 years, and you read some historical accounts and think about what that habitat would have looked like 20 years after all those trees came down and all that thick undergrowth and everything, in the hardwood bottoms in Louisiana are where the bears are. So they'll utilize just about any kind of habitat you give them. And if there's food there, they can utilize it.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit. The hunters, there is a hunting season on bears. They're well managed. They're in good shape.
Right.
And the photograph that you have behind us right now, that's one, Dan, that's the one that shows their range now in Tennessee?
Correct.
Okay.
That's the most recent map we've developed in the last couple of years with the range. And, it's a little bit, that last little block there of the brown that says potential future occupancy, we're looking at public lands there. That's what you're looking at,
Okay,
or
public
like
land.
Chuck Swan and things like that. And that's just to throw out there to show, hey, you're probably going to see them in areas like that first, because they're large blocks of undeveloped property. And I'm not aware of any bears being reported on Chuck Swan, but if somebody called me tomorrow and told me, it wouldn't surprise me.
Wouldn't surprise you.
It
And
wouldn't surprise
that's a
me
big
at all.
wildlife management area
Yes.
that we have. And the block in the middle, one of my highlights of my career here was back when I worked some. I didn't work with them. I followed them around, took pictures. But Dr. Pelton again, and a lot of folks from the Smoky, and a lot of folks from the Big South recreation area.
Right.
We put bears in there back 25 years ago. Actually, it was stocking's not the right word, but it was a management program to try to reestablish bears in an area where there was a lot of habitat and not a lot of people. How has that done?
Well, one of the first pictures that I have of me in uniform was holding two bears that were taken up to Big South Fork, and that would have been in 1997.
Oh, you were a baby.
I just started working, and that project was going on. And, they initially, after the first couple of years of that, felt like that they probably hadn't done enough to get put enough animals there to make them genetically different enough to do well. But, about 3 years ago, we had the opportunity to do a little bit of work up there and did some hair snares, which is, I'm not going into detail, but basically we used catching the bear's hair on barbed wire and doing some DNA work to get an idea of how many animals might be up there. And we did that for 8 weeks, and I believe we identified 180 individual animals, I believe. And that's adult. Those are designed to catch hair off adults. So it wouldn't include the cubs as well. And the estimate came out at around 220 animals. And it would have been even in an area smaller than that dark green there on the plateau.
Did that surprise you?
It did. And, statistics are interesting. And when you have identified, 180 animals or whatever, and then you say the population is 220, well, that tells you caught almost 80% or so of your population. That seems a little hard to do. And so I feel like that's an underestimate of what's there. And we've had a season for a couple years up there, and that season's designed to help landowners who have nuisance issues, and our harvest was around 55 last year. And that's a little bit concerning, but not for 1 year. If we have another harvest of 55, we might be taking a look at that. But you consider the fact that the mass was basically non-existent last year, and the bears were moving around a lot. We've had the same issues in the Tri-Cities area around Johnson City, where 1 year that season would harvest 150, 160 animals, and the next year harvest 25. It's completely dependent on how much food's available.
Is that often that time of year, hickory nuts or oak or what's
right.
it? Acorns.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're getting into late September, early October, sometimes they haven't hit yet, or other times you've just got a failure. But there's a lot of activity that time of year, and if there's not food in the rural areas, they will move into the urban areas to feed.
Okay.
So,
the Big South Fork recreation area was a cool thing where they took some adults, I believe, that were pregnant or had young or out of the Smoky Mountains, and actually during the hibernation time of year, and put them into different places on that area. And some of the places on that area were perfect for bears, the big rock formations that were there. And it was really fun to watch all that, Dan. And I'm glad to hear that it's a success. And folks over there are adapting to them pretty well. Yeah,
I spent a whole summer over there doing those surveys, and people were very interested. There were folks that just needed to be educated. They had questions, wanted to know what they could do. But overall, I had very little. I can't think of anybody just come up to me and say, what's going on here.
Okay, good deal. So, I don't want to run you out of time. Let's talk about the hunting seasons this year too, Dan, and the zones that we got. And all this is in the hunting guide that you can go find. The hunting guide is now online. It's also being sent all across the state. Officers are taking them everywhere. Tell us about hunting in the last few minutes we got.
Okay, well, this will be the third season that we've utilized this system. And what we wanted to do, that we've gotten to the point with our bears, that we're not so concerned about what's going on in Greene County or Washington County or Carter County. We're more concerned about what's going on in that whole general area. A bear that's in Greene County today could be in North Carolina tomorrow, Unicoi the next day.
Wow.
They move around a lot. So we've gone to this zone management. That's how we're reporting our data now. We can always go back and look at what's going on in a county and make a decision, like if we need to move a county over or something. But it's working pretty well. And the blue, the transitional area, is basically open to archery hunting. Okay. And those are areas where we may not get sustainable populations for some time to come, but we have enough movement in and out in the fall that needs to be addressed, and that's how that's designed.
Okay. All right. By the way, Dan is a product of Middle Tennessee, went to Mount Juliet High School.
Yes.
Is that what you said? So you've done a great job, Dan. This is cool, and we'll get you back because we're always never get enough out of our guests. But that's out there, plenty of hunting opportunities. And bear, you can hunt with dogs in some zones. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it's a tradition in Tennessee.
Yes.
All right. In the last 15 seconds, you got anything else you want to add?
Just be proactive. Don't wait till you have problems.
All right. Jason?
Check your hunting guide. All the rules and regs for these hunting seasons are in there. I think it's great to see some bears encroaching on Meigs County, my home county there. So anyway,
you can handle that, can't you?
So thanks for watching.
All right, and you're going to do a Facebook. You're going to do an extra. Dan's going to be out there with you. Take a look at that, everybody, too. We'll see you next week right here on Tennessee WildCast. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.